Welcome to Peter's podcast, where we talk about real yoga, actual happiness, and deep living. Thanks for joining me. Namaste, Wendy.
Namaste.
How's it going?
Okay.
Good. Feeling happy?
I wish I could make one of those little cartoon faces where like the
Yeah. So the reason we're having this reaction is because we decided to talk about happiness, and it got sparked a little bit, tiny bit, by this article that popped up somewhere, Time Inc. Daily Habits of Happiness Experts. So we're going to kind of talk about what is the subhead of this podcast. When I created Peter's podcast, I wanted to say a little bit more about what it's about, rather than because it's not about me. It's about real yoga, actual happiness, and deep living. So how do you find those three things? Or what are they? Or what are they about? Or what do they have to do with anything? So
it's getting a little broad there.
It's very broad. And mostly it's all been funneled through the notion of yoga. So we're talking about yoga practice, yoga philosophy, and so forth. But the experts surveyed, who are happiness experts, right, say very wonderful things, right? They get enough sleep, they have hobbies, they do exercise, they spend time in nature, they meditate or they pray, they spend time with friends outside of an office setting or a professional setting. They engage with some kind of support group, or they have therapy, or they spend time with family outside of their house. So they do things as a family. So those are all, good things to do. And I think that what our Grimrush kind of thing was, and why I chose to name this thing Actual Happiness, is that the notion of what is happiness is the thing I think that is most in question. And this article itself says you need to start there. It's not about a smiley face.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I'm a bit of a contrarian. So as soon as I hear the word happiness, I tend to say, for me, the conversation isn't about happiness. That the very word itself is somehow in our culture, it's like an ideal that like gets plastered up there, and then you're trying to meet that ideal, and the opposite is not happiness or sadness or whatever. And so I get a little contrary when I encounter the argument framed that way, or just like the issue framed that way.
Yeah.
But when I listen to you saying sort of repeatedly, what's actual happiness, I feel like we're meeting it somewhere, and the question then becomes, how can we wean ourselves off the idea that we have of happiness in order to find something that's more akin to what I would call contentment, which is much more of a yogic concept.
I agree. But we did wear black today, so we're in
I think it's really weird.
We're on the dark side of happiness.
Yeah.
Yeah, contentment, and there's a word in Sanskrit, santosha. And
exactly.
I think the very first podcast episode I ever did for Peter's podcast, and it was with Jenny Bloom, was called Like Happiness.
Only better.
only lasting or something. I forget now.
Yeah.
But I didn't prepare by looking that up because it just occurred to me. But so this notion, santosha, is a word that means contentment in Sanskrit, but it doesn't, it means santosha in Sanskrit. Yeah. Contentment is a translation of that. And even the word contentment in English, it has a passive quality to it.
Yeah.
I think.
I'm content with that.
Yeah, like I can live with that.
Yeah.
Or, oh, well, I guess I'll just be content with that.
Yeah.
It's going to have to do, that kind of notion. And the way that yoga uses that word in the Yoga Sutras, for instance, it's much more of a practice than a passive state of giving up or accepting.
Yeah. Well, it's one of it's it is a practice. It comes up in the sutras as one of the niyamas, which is part of the yamas, and niyamas part of the 8 limbs. But like for me, there's something in that, like contentment, because santosha carries with it this idea of being okay with what is, like being literally sort of at peace with
Mm-hmm.
what is. And it doesn't, I feel like we're so conditioned to being like that, to being focused on outcomes, that if I get what I want, then I should be happy.
Right.
But santosha is much more about like a practice around staying kind of in this, the word that's coming to mind is mindful, in this mindful place around what comes to me isn't, like the outside experience is the what is, and my relationship with it is the santosha.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And to me, all of this, like actual happiness, has to entail being okay with the sort of movement of the wheel. Sometimes things work out the way you want them to, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
And that's just true.
That's really key too. That the fact that it's a wheel implying there's always motion, right? So it's like contentment isn't a place you arrive at and then it stays.
Yeah.
Right? Life is in constant motion. And I often get into this conversation around the gunas, because we have in the gunas the idea of I'm acting. How am I acting? Am I acting with my attention on the goal, what I'm going to get from the acting? Am I acting on I don't expect to get what I want, so I'm going to just say
not acting.
Screw that, right?
Contrary.
Wanting to act.
Yeah.
Right? Or is the action itself enough, right? Yeah. Which is the sattva guna, to be in a place of I'm acting and I may get whatever. But that's not the key. The key is the continuous wheel, the motion.
Yeah. For me, it came up in a slightly different guise, which is that there's not so much necessarily about action, but about how we relate.
Yep.
And that is, it's like a similar kind of idea about, are we relating like I'm going to do something to that external situation? Or are we relating like I'm going to withdraw from it? Or are we somehow in some kind of ability to pause? And to me, those things are conditioned, right? Like if I'm gonna try and fix it, change it, move it, push it away, act on it, or if I'm gonna, shut down, withdraw, ignore, sometimes in the name of being sattvic, but really in disguise tamasic.
Right.
And in between, can I take it in? Can I sort of deconstruct it a little bit, get my mind off its patterns, relate to it in some sort of neutral way? Like, okay, so I feel these things, I think these things, this is what it appears to me, but I'm going to pause and then take an action that's the sattvic. Like all that, to me, relating to the thing takes place before I even get to an action. And I've been thinking a lot about really like the gunas as part of like what one book I'm reading calls relational consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And
Terrence Real's book.
exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think to a large extent, there's a lot of writing out right now. I'm reading Rick Rubin's new book too, and this notion of kind of having your antenna up or being mindful, as you just said a minute ago, or being able to catch a moment of clarity before you act, before you engage in the relation is kind of what a lot of these things are for. It's like, how do you create a little more spaciousness so that you're not always just having a reaction, but you're able to respond and and that the ability to do that, I think, requires some kind of a practice. Like you have to have a yoga practice, or you have to have some non-yoga meditation practice. You have to have something that gives you the capacity to note the distinction between what you think and what's actually going on, or how there are options.
And to just, some kind of a practice that moves you off your ego's assessment, even if that assessment is something you come back to.
Right.
Because doing that brings you back to your reaction in a conscious way. So it's like, what was I thinking about? There's this idea that we want to act upon the world, but we are part of the world.
Right.
Like, we're not all powerful. Like, the mind is not an all powerful tool. And so if we can get with that program a little bit and say, well, I don't know for sure, but I know for sure what I'm experiencing, and I can be with that experience and from that place see all the different components and know that, there's me, there's you, there's this situation. And I don't have I'm part of this, but I don't have all the control over, all the control over everything in it. And so if I can align with being in my own sattvic container place, then what's going to happen, and be aware of what is, to my best knowledge. I mean, I don't have the full objective reality picture any more than you do.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's not what Viveka is. And if I do that, then I can create all these, I can be in relationship in a way that is really, I think, what all these happiness people are talking about. Connection with your family, group activities, feeling part of something, all of those things.
Being able to sleep.
Being able to sleep, which is huge. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of like my thing, like the only thing in nature that we can actually act upon. And then only sometimes, if we're not feeling utterly reactive, is ourselves. Mm-hmm. And then it moves outward again. Mm-hmm. And we all have that experience over and over again. If I'm in a good mood, the world looks great and things happen in a certain way.
Right.
That they tend not to if you come in with like fear or anxiety.
Right. And trying to push things.
Or trying to push things, right? Dominate.
I mean, I had an experience of that this morning. Like, I got a little tweaked by a couple of things, but just decided, okay, I'm just going to take my own space and be in that space. I did a meditation, I did a little reading, blah, blah, blah. And then things just suddenly started falling into place. So all the things I had been thinking about just sort of became options. And
I like that.
Yeah. And so, the way that things happen, like a lot of times we get into this, again, goal-oriented thing, this rajasic relationship with things like, oh, I'm going to take this practice that teaches me how to be non-reactive, and from it I'm going to get everything I want.
Exactly.
Right.
It's
And
that last statement that gets you.
well, there it is. It's like totally blew the whole point of why we're doing it. Right. So like we can want things. Absolutely. We can even get the things we want.
Sometimes.
Absolutely. You know, sometimes. And the key to happiness, right? Santosha, which doesn't mean, oh, well, I guess I can only get this much happiness, right? It's like true happiness, like true, like I'm in the right place in the world. I'm able to connect with all the shariras, to use that model, right? You're like, I can tap my bliss as well as all the other aspects of what I am, right? Because now I'm living harmoniously. And those can come from this willingness to accept things as they are and move from there.
Right. Yeah. And so hearing you reflect it back that way makes me really feel doubly clear that the thing that has to get let go of, the illusion or the image that the mind makes, that we have to let go of in order to kind of keep creating that state of happiness, of actual happiness, is to realize that it, and this is also in all of every single one of the ancient texts, it's not about what we get. It just can't be. Because once you say that actual happiness consists in being okay with what is, and in fact, that is what you get from that niyama, you have to kind of, I think, and maybe this is like a Debbie Downer moment for me, but you have to let go of whatever your mind's vision was of what would be happy, right? Like, you take anything that you always wanted and look at what happens with your ego, and you say you might have to let go of that and see how much clinging you'll find in yourself. It's going to be a lot. But when you realize if the goal then becomes contentment or santosha, then accepting the thing that is the place where you start moving forward into actual happiness.
Right.
Because it's not going to be otherwise until you get there.
Right. I said something to a student recently, and then I mentioned something to you when we were talking about this book. And I just looked at the book today, and what is the guy's name? Oh, shoot. The book is called Happy Yoga.
Yeah.
And the author is Ross. Thank you. And in the book, he describes something about desire. And it's a little bit of a paraphrase or an alternate phrasing of something that Al says a lot. Alan Finger will often say, when you get what you want, you have bliss about it for like 3 seconds, and then in creeps but what about that adapter that I could get for that? Or what about, like, if it was a pair of shoes, what about the handbag that matches that, and so forth. And the way that that Ross mentions desire in his book is there is this bliss that comes from getting something. And the bliss is because when you get the thing for that moment, that instant,
there's no desire. Right.
You do not experience desire, and that is bliss.
Right.
And so what I said to a student of mine recently was, I've been going through this thing over the past few years where something will come up, like I want something, right? I just bought a new amplifier, right?
I just bought a new pair of shoes.
Yeah, there you go. So, sometimes you get the things, right? And so you have that 3 seconds of bliss from it, right? But something else has been going on where I go, why am I occupying so much of my attention with this desire for this thing?
Yeah.
I don't need this thing. Yeah. What would happen if I just don't get that thing?
Yeah.
And then I let it go. It's happened with our cars a few times because we've been sort of juggling what kind of car do we want, And so, the letting go of the desire, like literally explicitly.
Yeah.
Like, well, what if I don't get that? So what? Let's just forget. Let's just stop thinking about that so much. Whew, the same feeling comes about.
Yeah.
And that's been very instructive as well. It's like you can get the satisfaction either way, which is another
Well, but the thing is that,
exercise in santosha.
again, the satisfaction of the external thing is not the thing.
Right.
Like, I don't know, but sometimes I just feel like this living program is just way beyond our comprehension. And we should just acknowledge that and be in utter acceptance of the things that are. And when we're not, exactly, do a practice around it. So that's what I hear in your thing. It's like acknowledging that, where's the balance point for me in this? How much pursuing of making something better do I need to do, and how much letting go of the idea of what I need do I need to do? Because somewhere in there, I think is, just this kind of process of, becoming and being, and then letting go of patterns that make us happy because they're adaptive, and then they don't work anymore, and then we have to shift it. Like, we're coming up on our 20th wedding anniversary, and I think we've been through a lot of different phases in being in harmony with each other. It's just part of what happens in a long-term relationship. And we kind of getting to the place where you're letting what is now be what is, and relating to that thing involves letting go of a thing that you thought you wanted. But yet, this is what I always find, here we still are. Right? Like, it's like the pattern has, the overall pattern has remained, but what's contained inside it has changed. It's like I had cellular transformation 10 times over.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not speaking from a place where I have mastered my desire in any way, shape, or form, as I think you just also experienced. But I think, my version of working with my desire is to say, oh, well, here's this thing, and here's my pattern around this thing. And if I just understand that I'm not happy, there's that, right? I'm not content. I don't feel good when I just indulge in that old pattern. Interesting.
I'm content with that.
I'm happy with that.
We'll talk again.
Yeah.
Namaste.
Namaste.